And thank you to the Inside community for having us on today. Our team, Tyler and I, and the extended family at T3 are really excited to be here to share some of our thoughts, have a discussion, an open conversation about the type of work we're doing with our clients, and hopefully there's some tidbits and knowledge that you guys can take from this to help promote and encourage your companies to grow in the ways that you're trying to scale. So I'll quickly give a background on just an introduction of who T3 is, to hopefully give you some context on why the heck we're on here today. Our firm's about 20 years old. We have offices in Palo Alto, San Francisco, New York, and Boston. We are a very uniquely positioned firm in the commercial real estate market that focuses on high growth, often venture-backed and or publicly traded tech and life science companies. And the way we think about our role is an extension of you and your team as real estate experts in the room to hopefully drive a lot more critical thought and analysis around what it takes to develop the types of cultures to drive recruiting and retention amongst your people and build beautiful workplaces that enable your people to really love being a part of your company. And so think of us as a new age real estate department and or commercial real estate firm doing strategy, consulting, brokerage, and site selection work for companies all over the globe, anchored in those four core markets, but trying to find and partner with some of the best entrepreneurs around the planet to help them, change the lives of the folks they're trying to do so through their products. So that's a little bit about of us as a firm. Quickly on our team. So again, my name is David Bergeron. I'm the president of T3 Advisors and oversee all of our daily operations and sort of P&L responsibilities for the firm. I've worked and started my career cutting my teeth in Boston, and then came out to California a little less than 10 years ago to help, to expand us to Palo Alto and San Francisco. And I'm joined here by Tyler Hales.
Yeah, Tyler Hales. I've been at T3 for about 5 years now, and before that, I was at Ernst & Young for a number of years in the audit consulting practice there. At T3, I lead our location strategy and site selection practice and help companies grow intelligently throughout the world.
Awesome. All right, so to get started, I want to sort of, ask a question that we often like to think about when we're first introducing this topic. And this obviously is, comes from, one of the, arguably one of the better entrepreneurs and business leaders out there today, and Jeff Bezos. And there's a quote that he's often cited for asking, which is, and I'll just read it here. It says, I frequently get the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And while that is an interesting question, I almost never get the question, what is not going to change in the next 10 years? And I submit to you that the second question is actually more important of the two, because you can build a business strategy around the things that are stable in time. When you have something that you know is true, even over the long term, you can afford to put a lot of energy into it. And I think, to me, this actually helps frame a lot of what we think about when it comes to sort of the future of space and the future of work, and what we as companies are trying to enable and produce and put in front of the employees, teammates, et cetera, that help drive the ability to produce great products. And so many of you guys, have our portfolio companies of Insight. You have a lot of, very, intelligent and highly capable and very competitive people that are trying to tackle something, that's often against all odds when it comes to, reaching success in production. And one of the things that we like to think about is what is it that you and your company will likely need next year and the following year and 5 years from now, and sometimes even 10 years, because as we've seen historically, the average lease term nationally has been over 10 years historically. That's come down and in some markets because of the advent of some of the new relationships between landlords and tenants. But overall, these are still very long-term considerations and solutions. And so what we like to think about is what is it that we can be doing as companies to enable those folks to continue to be super productive. And I think that one of the things that we always come back to, whether it's the anthropological studies or just surveying you find, is that people, we as humans are creatures of collaboration. And that collaboration is often most done through relationship building that enables you to build trust with your colleagues to produce something better tomorrow than you have today. And so much of that will still continue to be done in person. And while, there's an advent of technology that's allowed us to be much more mobile, there's an advent of technology that allows us to collaborate, which we'll touch on later today, in a much more effective manner in multiple offices. The reality is we will still want to have places to come work together, and what those places look like, and what they're used for, and how we design them, and the contractual obligations we have with leases through landlords. All that stuff can change, but I would contend and contest that over the next 10 years, people will still want to get together. That the problems we'll be solving will become more technical, as we see things like artificial intelligence and automation replace a lot of the long tail, tasks we're asked to do, as a population. That'll just free up more time and arguably create more opportunity and more jobs around tasks that cannot be done by a single individual, but will need to be tackled by multiple folks because of the complexity. And those folks will get together and collaborate to drive some of those next great innovations that we'll see over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we think this is a super important theme that I think hopefully ties together the importance of real estate, the role it plays in your company in producing culture, and the drivers around productivity. Now, the question is where to do that. And that's what we're going to touch on today. Is really, it's not about all being under one roof and we all have to be together. And there's no way to do this if we're not, all in the same headquarters at 10,000 people. There's ways to do this that get you far outside of the traditional norms of what we've seen historically work in real estate. And that's what we're going to touch on here today.
Great. So segue from that is that we're seeing several companies. We're seeing a trend that companies are expanding earlier in terms of headcount, funding, overall life cycle. And we're helping more and more companies, even at the 100 to 200 person level, sometimes Series A or Series B, companies consider and execute and expand into new markets. And so we know from our experience that determining the optimal timing and location and composition of those expansion offices can be really difficult, and driving alignment across an organization for what is a vision for the expansion can be incredibly challenging. And so what we want to do today first is share 4 reasons why it may be a good idea to consider expanding earlier than you may have otherwise thought, and some of the data and metrics we put around determining where to expand and where to grow to drive alignment across your organization, and how we frame these studies. So we'll start with that, and then we'll talk about how to do it successfully once we know where we want to grow. So the first item that we have here is savings opportunity. So everyone here is acutely aware of the premium that companies pay to be in innovation hubs and to grow in innovation hubs. And that premium is clearly worth it and working for many companies. But we want to shed some additional light today on what exactly is the incremental cost or premium of operating in traditional tech or innovation hubs, and how can that be alleviated through a distributed workforce or multiple offices. So T3 Advisors did a study of more than 100 public tech and life science companies, and we evaluated and aggregated lease commitments and rent expense per person for these companies. And the first finding, fairly intuitive, is that companies with less people pay more on a per person basis for their real estate. So companies with less than 10,000 people pay on average more than twice what companies with more than 100,000 people pay for their real estate, as you can see here in this chart. So 8,100 is the average that we found for companies with less than 10,000 compared to 3,900 per person for companies with more than 100,000. So clearly there are economies of scale and negotiating leverage as you get larger that make your incremental costs, real estate costs, go down. There's a whole different category for non-public companies that are trying to be scrappy and figure this out as they grow and scale. But many of these companies are paying even more than $8,100 per person. And so what we know is that the incremental dollar spend or cost for an employee at a smaller company is expensive from a real estate perspective. The data backs that up. The data also backs up that operating, obviously, in one of our innovation hubs, we've defined that here as Austin, Boston, Los Angeles, New York City, and San Francisco, and Seattle. You pay a significant premium to be there. So 65% on average, companies that are headquartered in one of those markets, they pay a 65% premium over companies that are headquartered in non-tech or non-innovation hub, as we've defined it here. An easy way to bring that number down, that 7,700 down, is to expand earlier and more aggressively into other markets, even if you retain your headquarters in one of the innovation hubs. So what are value locations? What would we consider value locations, and what are the opportunities here? First of all, we need to look beyond real estate costs. Real estate costs are just a fraction on your income statement, a fraction of what your labor and salary costs are. And so what we've done here is a hypothetical expansion model showing several different markets, sample markets, aggregating both labor and real estate costs. So if you look at that, the value locations on the spectrum are on the right-hand side. And you'll see that many Canadian locations end up being on the right-hand side of that spectrum because there is such a strong opportunity for labor arbitrage, for lower salaries in those markets, but incredible talent nonetheless. And then you see a few other U.S. markets in that 30 to 40% range: Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Nashville, really strong contenders for expansion opportunities that we've seen as outgrowth from innovation hubs over the last several years. You can see the reason for that. So what does that mean in terms of dollar impact? This is a hypothetical model of 200 people, a distributed kind of software company, a hypothetical example. We looked at upfront costs compared to the Bay Area, upfront savings. We looked at annual ongoing savings, and then we looked at total 5-year savings. So on an annual basis, we would expect to save about $4 million if you expand into kind of a tier 2 market. So we're assuming very conservatively 20%. And then on a rent basis, we can expect to save at least $1 million over the term. And then upfront costs, the Bay Area is the most expensive construction market in the world, and it's not even close. And so there are significant construction savings when you build out your office space. And then further, there's government incentives that vary by market, but there's a strong opportunity in many of these expansion markets to achieve some of the savings around government incentives. So this hypothetical model, it's very achievable to obtain at least $30 million in savings for 200 people over 5 years. So very significant when you think about the money that can be reinvested back to the company to fuel growth and to fuel aspects that are core to the business rather than real estate. So our second item, it's not all about cost. Most companies that we work with, the number one driver is the ability to recruit and retain qualified talent. What's the point of expanding into a new market if you can't hire great people? And so we want to share a little bit about how we think about evaluating talent in new markets. This grid is it has several different inputs here across the different axes. So I'll share that the horizontal axis is location quotient, which is a measure of technical talent density in market. So a 1 is average of the US, is a US average. So anything above a 1 in tech talent depth is more dense than the US average. So we're looking at a number of cities here. Most of them are above a 1, so more dense than the US average. The vertical axis is average annual earnings. So companies that are higher on that grid vertically are more expensive. So we see, obviously we have some outliers: Seattle, San Francisco, and San Jose. But we want to ask the question, what happens when you remove those outliers? How do cities stack up and rank when those are removed? And so if we zoom in on the field, this is what it looks like. If you look at cities that are in the bottom kind of right-hand quadrant, those are cities with a high degree of talent density, technical and software talent density, at a lower cost. And so you look at Austin, many folks know this is now an expensive and very tight real estate market, but there's still significant labor savings in Austin. Similar to Washington, D.C., we're seeing a lot of volume of activity and expansion of tech companies into Denver and Salt Lake City and Atlanta and Dallas, which you kind of see in that, again, that bottom right-hand quadrant here. And so this is one easy visual for presenting the trade-off between tech-rich markets across labor savings. There's hiring competition that needs to be considered as well. Clearly, one of the reasons that many companies expand outside of the Bay Area is because, or Boston or any other innovation hub, is because it's hard to hire there when you're scaling your business. You're competing with behemoth tech companies, and that's a challenge. What this presents, this map presents, is annual job postings for a trailing 12-month period as a percentage of the population in each of these markets. And so what you see, cities with the larger dot and in red or yellow are cities where there's a significant volume of activity around job postings. It's one measure, not a perfect measure, but it's a proxy for the competition to hire this talent in market. And then you can find other opportunities for markets where the competition is a lot less. So this is, again, another data point to evaluate when you look at expanding. Another dimension that most companies we work with really care about is diversity. And clearly, this is a main driver for expansion and really critical for every company that we work with. Clearly, operating in a more diverse environment, there are many proven benefits to doing this, and can de-risk many elements of your business moving forward. It can just be beneficial all around. And so we've created an index to look at both female participation in the workforce in the technology industry specifically, which is measured on the vertical axis here, and then also the ethnic diversity in market, and that's measured as the percentage of non-white individuals working in the technology sector. That's across the horizontal axis. So what you see on the upper right quadrant is markets that are what we've termed diversity leaders. They have, compared to the field, they have a strong presence of women in the workforce, specifically within tech. And then they also have strong ethnic representation and ethnic diversity. And so while not perfect, these are markets that are leading the field. On the upper left-hand side, you see markets with strong female participation in the workforce. And then on the bottom right, you see strong ethnic representation. So you can evaluate that and consider that and how that can change the diversity objectives and targets that you have within your company.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. So the kind of final piece of this kind of four-piece puzzle, as we think about expanding into secondary markets, often comes to the interconnectivity of these offices and how we're working together as a team. You know, one of the things that we highlight and talk often about is that there's three kind of primary drivers that are important to consider when we're thinking about the interconnectivity viability of opening that second office, third office, fourth office. And the three things that we think are relevant to you as a high growth, you know, venture-backed tech company today come down to the following. We think, you know, number one, like, again, technology is there. It's finally reached a point of viability and success enabled by a bunch of vendors and providers. But we believe that it's finally viable. I think the game has changed from a relationship perspective between traditional owners and traditional end users of space. T3 is in a unique position in the market where we actually don't represent any landlords ourselves. All of the work and advisory support we provide is to companies like yours. So we only work on behalf of the end user or the buyer, the tenant or tech company signing that lease. So we have a pretty unique perspective on how this relationship has molded over time, and I actually think that the opportunity is as bright and as exciting as possible as it's ever been for you guys as the end users. And then I think the third piece that we think about is just the design considerations that really do matter. And I think there's this advent of a lot of you know, clickbait kind of fake news running around that, you know, traditional means of open office are dead, or you know, we need to go back to a very different, you know, design centric focus for these offices to really enable them to be productive. And I think really understanding the finer points of what that actually means for you and your company is important versus just sort of the basic headlines. So we'll touch first on, you know, as we think about what it means from a technological perspective, you know, what are the things that I need to be concerned about and be thoughtful of when I'm opening these offices. So, you know, I think here is where you need to have a plan, and we need to be deliberate. I think is probably the most pointed thing that we talk about. You know, I think we've lived the experience, you know, having, you know, run our company for almost 20 years of, you know, it wasn't too long ago, less than 5 years ago, where we like tore out the old Polycom or Crestor systems, and, you know, there goes $150,000 worth of equipment that you initially needed to have connectivity from a technological perspective between offices. And God forbid that the person you were trying to talk to wasn't on that same system. Like it was very difficult, very costly, a lot of maintenance and labor, and that model was fundamentally broken. Not too dissimilar to like most industries that you guys are probably building companies in. A company like Zoom came along and found a way to actually kind of change the game. And we've seen a company go from, you know, go from a category being like very difficult, very expensive and require a lot of labor to now incredibly nimble. You know, and that this has been, you know, I think confirmed by, I'm sure a lot of you are users of technologies like Zoom or others, and or, you know, their success in the public markets, that this is actually happening. And we can be, you know, I can be in a Lyft or an Uber going up to, you know, my office in San Francisco or commuting into New York, and I can actively be on a video call tethered to my phone in a way that actually works. And like that was not the case even 2 or 3 years ago, right? So this is now possible. The ability to be remote and still feel like you're involved and participatory is actually there. So that's enabling a change and like a shift that we have never seen until kind of this point in time. I think the next piece that we think about is back to like, we sort of mentioned this originally, like you need to have a game plan. And I think there's an aspect of this that when we think about the connectivity and the creation of culture, when you're extending into the second office, it cannot be overstated. And you've heard all of, the top CEOs or entrepreneurs, like, while product is king and always going to be what really sets us apart when we're just getting started, the thing that creates sort of lasting value and sort of legacy type of benefits are going to be anchored in that culture. And when you open secondary offices or third offices or go international, probably the biggest takeaway that we can sort of leave you guys with today when it comes to that culture is you need to be deliberate with it. And having a plan, and this is kind of a 5-step plan that we think about when working with clients that are trying to go through this for the first time or second time, to again make sure we have things that we can measure, things that we can message. The change management aspects are critical, and there's a lot of kind of right things to do and wrong things to do that can be deployed to sort of make this stuff set you guys up for success. Another takeaway is don't go at it alone. You're not the first person to do this. Ask fellow entrepreneurs, ask colleagues that have been part of companies that have expanded historically before. Ask T3. Like we want to. You don't need to go at this alone. Don't go at it blind. Make sure you find folks around you that can give you the type of advice to avoid the pitfalls that so many other companies or clients have before you. We think about this, and this is part of a broader big activity we do with a bunch of our clients on the thought starter side. And the only reason we want to highlight this is that, again, back to having a process and having a game plan, these are the types of conversations you want to be having internally. You want to consider relocating, a senior leader, ideally from headquarters, that's been a part of producing and being a part of that culture, and understand what it means to be a member of your team and what makes us different than everyone else and what makes us better than our competition, what makes us historically remember where we were and where we're going, and how do we get those stories extended to that second office, that third office, that fourth office. That can happen through people relocating. We talk a lot about having a pull versus push learning model for for the open workplace, and we're going to different locations. This is very much of having resources set up, having messaging set up such that people feel like there's an easy way for them to access the same information around how and where the business is going, what it is we're focused on for 2020, what our policies are for maternity leave. Like, these are basic fundamental questions that every employee deserves, equal access to. Don't make people feel like an outsider just because they're not at headquarters sitting next to the senior leader that's implemented all of these policies. Make that available. Make that feel like you're a part of that team, regardless of location considerations. And then I think the third thing we talk about here is just, it really anchors in someone needs to own this. And when you go to a secondary office, ideally there's someone relocating from headquarters, but that's not always the case. And if it's not, you need to make sure that someone feels ownership and responsibility and accountability over the culture. And that, yes, everyone has an influence on it. And yes, culture is ultimately made up not about the words we have on the wall or the slogans that are painted on the chalkboard, but it ends up becoming, your culture is predicated and led by what you ultimately end up tolerating within each office. What do you let get by? And Ben Horowitz talks about that all the time. You hear a lot of successful leaders from all across culture books that really harp on this issue, that if you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem when it comes to building these cultures. So even if you can't have someone extended from headquarters, make sure that someone really does feel ownership over creating the type of culture that you want to see built in your secondary office, as the leader and advocate for what's happening in this new expanding exciting team. The kind of the second piece we talk about here is sort of that game. The game has changed from a relationship perspective between landlord and tenant. And obviously we've all read the headlines over the last few months about WeWork and sort of what this ultimately is leading to, and what does this mean for me. So I wanted to take a couple minutes to sort of touch on, again, from the perspective of you guys as operators of high growth tech companies and life science companies. Here's the way that I would think about it if I'm you. And I think that, what is it that we can do to best take advantage of the realities of today's market when it comes to this sort of change of the guard, if you will, or shift in what's happening in this category. So to start, we've got, people call it co-working space, people call it space as a service. It's, flex office space. I mean, even WeWork has become almost like the Kleenex of, tissues. It categorically has now almost become, a noun for what that category ultimately is. And so, I think that we've all called this a lot of different things. I think fundamentally the thing that's most important for you guys to comprehend and understand and just recognize is that it's just different than your traditional landlord. I think what all these people and service providers are trying to do is recognize the sort of insanity that comes with you as a Series B backed company who just landed 18 and 24 months of money signing up for a 10-year lease. In very, very few scenarios is that company the same size, occupying the same space in 10 years. You're either going to continue to hit those milestones and raise more money and probably triple in size over the next 5 years, or go the other way. And I think that the recognition needs to be given to WeWork and others where they just found that model as broken as I think you guys do as end users and we did as advisors, to finally say we're going to go do something about that. And categorically, it's now a new day. There are a lot of people and a lot of companies, WeWork and otherwise, that have recognized that there's a huge opportunity here to take advantage of a need that the market has, which is more flexibility, shorter term, and more plug and play opportunities versus traditional models. So, I think from a statistics perspective, you got to remember, so WeWork categorically represents plus or minus a third of the available, we'll call it flex space in the market today. There's over 700 flex office providers. 80% of them operate in a single location, right? So it's still incredibly fragmented, on the long tail. There's some core big providers that obviously, are in multiple markets and international. But again, a lot of one-offs that are still out there. I think if you're in a core tech market right now and you're currently in a WeWork, my guess is you'll continue to be serviced, in hopefully a really adequate and successful way by WeWork. I think there are considerations if some of you guys are operating in WeWorks in, tier 2, tier 3 cities. There's been kind of published statements that I think some of the focus in WeWork and some of the capital allocation may not be going to some of those tertiary markets going forward. So, I think there could be some changes potentially in either ownership or control and or responsibility of who's actually managing your current setup in some of these markets. So something to be thoughtful of and potentially be, planning a plan B if that were to come about. I think, we kind of think about three primary things as an action plan, if you will, if you're trying to be opportunistic for kind of what the market can offer today. I think that realistically, you can be opportunistic through the reality that this is here to stay. And whether it's WeWork or fill in the blank next name, it's going to be around. We've seen this before, right? Very few of us get on America Online right now to search. Like we go to Google and Yahoo and others, right? So just because these guys were sort of first doesn't mean categorically it's broken. Whether they succeed or fail going forward. I think that there's studies that show that by 2030, you could have potentially 20% of the commercial market being offered in some sort of flexible solution. I think right now it's only 2%, so that's obviously a gigantic change in, 11 or 12 years to be something very different, but also very, I think for us as the end users, I think could be a great thing in terms of a transition. Right now in some of the core markets, the bigger markets, even the flexible office solutions represent, 4% of the market in San Francisco. They represent, and New York's about 4%. Their larger locations right now are in Shanghai and in London, where it's 6%. So it's still a very small portion of the overall markets that we're talking about. But I think that's going to continue to change and trend in a direction that's going to be supportive to what our needs are, which again, back to flexibility is going to be king. I think the other thing you'll see the other providers, IWG, Regis, they've been around a long time. They know how to manage these types of facilities, and you'll continue to see, I think, tailwinds support kind of their growth and offerings, over the next couple of years. Notel, Industrious, Convene, there are a bunch of good brands out there and a bunch of, I think, very, very smart people building successful companies that will be there to offer you what you want. And that's flexibility, that's turnkey delivery, that's someone that wants to sort of partner with me on my space instead of, just try and manage returns on the back end for their investors. And so I think this is going to continue to be a good thing for us as these end users. We talk about being creative, and I think that this is actually where I think we're going to see a counterpunch by traditional landlords. You got to remember, like there's like with only 4% or 2% or 6% of these macro main markets being controlled by these flexible office providers, that means that all the incumbents still have control of the remaining 96%. And I think what we're going to continue to see is solutions provided by these traditional landlords in a way that, again, builds a market, a bigger, broader market for us to have choice. And I think that, what you'll continue to see is that brand won't really matter. I think that a lot of us found that the reasons people were going to WeWork versus Knotel versus Convene were really driven by cost and location, and that was really about it. So I think whether, if Shorenstein or Equity or Blackstone or Boston Properties spin up another version that's in a great location and priced right, there's no reason they can't be successful as well. I think you'll also start to see the advent of loyalty programs, right? So the same way we've seen, in the airlines industry or, in hotels, like there'll be aspects of this that'll give you, try and drive some choice to you in ways that helps you on the margin. But again, I think end users will continue to sort of focus on convenience and price, overall. And I think there'll continue to be more options, which is good for us as end users. I think the next thing we look at, in being creative is just this bifurcation of the market. And I think that these flexible solutions are doing a good job right now of servicing the less than 5,000 square foot office users. Again, the flexible office, solution providers, whether it's WeWork and Knotel, they're also on the back end signing longer term leases. So they're doing 10, 12, 15-year deals, along with a lot of the sort of the Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies that are also signing, land banking, big properties and big pieces of space for a long time. So you're kind of being left with a little bit of this mid-market space, call it 10 to 50,000 square feet right now, that's a little up for grabs. And I think that while the flexible office providers are trying to find a way to service a 25,000 footer or 50,000 footer, it's not quite there yet in every market. And so that's still, I think, something that's going to continue to flesh out in a way that, hopefully they'll continue to do a good and better job at that. Hopefully landlords continue to sort of recognize that the flexibility for that is going to be driven by competition by these flex office solutions coming further upstream. And we'll get, again, hopefully the net is better terms, less term length that we're committing to, as in not just as a 2,000 footer, but as a 20,000 footer or even a 100,000 footer. Again, another good punchline that I think benefits us as the end user. And then I think that this sort of to kind of culminates, in my opinion, which the strategy that I would be recommending to you guys as companies and to a lot of our clients right now is to again being opportunistic, willing to be creative, and being kind of recognizing where the current combination of parts can kind of best fit for my needs. And I actually think it's kind of this two-pronged approach. I think there is like this kind of primary core strategy that actually I think can be very opportunistic on traditional subleases. So right now, there's obviously a lot of venture dollars flowing to a lot of high growth companies that are growing quickly and often growing out of spaces fast. And what that's leaving is legacy for great space. And there may be a space that's left behind that someone has spent a bunch of money on that you can take advantage of the, 3, 5, potentially 10, $50 million they've already sunk to that space and that infrastructure. That can be a great thing to sort of to take advantage of. And I think what the willingness you need to do is be, whether you're searching ideally for a 2-year term and it's actually a 3-year sublease, or you're searching for a 5-year term and they're only willing to give you 3. Taking advantage of all the CapEx savings that comes with subleases, all the IT and existing wiring infrastructure that comes with subleases, all of the furniture that's often in place that comes with subleases. Being opportunistic on that can be really powerful. And then my recommendation is go find a flexible office solution, whether it's through WeWork or Knotel or Convene or any other provider right now, to be your sort of your support strategy to hedge one way or the other. Let's say I can only sign a 5-year lease and a 5-year sublease, and I don't think the space will last me longer than 3 years. Well, great. Let's use that CapEx savings right now. Sign that sublease because the CapEx savings and capital is so great up front, and then use these other flexible office solutions to provide you overflow space, or vice versa, right? So I think this two-pronged approach actually could be really interesting for people to start thinking more critically about, just because it's new to the market. The market's finally ripe and developed enough on both sides to take advantage of, and it's something that can ultimately save a ton of time and money. So kind of shifting gears to the sort of final piece of this, which we sort of touch on, which is this idea of, being deliberate with our design and thoughtful about how we're setting our people up for success. This is sort of the last piece of the puzzle. And, right now you guys have all seen the clickbait. And again, we've got stories of, our parents and grandparents calling us, telling us, the open office is dead, and I'm so glad I have my traditional cube. And this is something that I knew all along was wrong. And I think a lot of that hype that we all sort of love to read and sort of follow comes primarily from one traditional study. And, the reality is that, we're seeing, tweets and quotes and headlines across the board. The reality is that this study, while noteworthy and interesting, was a study of less than 500 respondents, positioned questions in a way that I think kind of drove to an outcome that was ultimately looking for. And I just don't think tells the whole story. And so, I think, the net here is we're seeing a lot of fake news, I think around this topic. And I think you being thoughtful about what ultimately is best for you is going to be important. So what we did and what others have done is try to find other sources of truth. And I think, that the Leesman Index and Leesman data is the largest provider of sort of analytics and analysis and surveying information on the topic of workplace in the world. And, this is a good example, I think, of a study that was done with, over 275,000 respondents. And really the punchline here is kind of what you'd expect, where, on that x-axis, you have the percentage of people that are basically in private office. And then as it extends out to the right, the people that are in fully open offices. And then on the y-axis, you've basically got their ability to be productive and effective at their job. And so what you sort of see here is the people that all are in private offices sometimes works really great for certain organizations and other times totally fails. And as you sort of extend all the way out across the x-axis, you see a pretty even distribution. For some companies, it's really great to have a bunch of private offices. For others, it's not. And I think that, for us, the things to take away from this are, you have, every company's different. And to be sort of this, one size fits all, or sort of this lemming model, or because it worked for Google or Facebook, it's going to work for me. I think that's a flawed approach. And so, the tactic that should be taken if we're opening a second office is to recognize the types of people we're going to be hiring, the types of work we're going to be asking them to do, the types of collaboration that's going to be required for us to be effective. And contextually, where are they coming from? What are these people? Did they just get out of college, or have they been working in industry for 25 or 30 years in a way that really works well for them, right? So these considerations and sort of personalization and understanding around the diversity and optionality when it comes to the workplace design, that's the winning combination. It's not one or the other, it's both, it's all. And I think this is something that, I think as you're thinking about doing build outs, you're thinking about design, as you're advising some of your, colleagues or senior execs, I think it's something that's going to really end, in a much more positive and successful outcome for you and your teams. And so again, a couple sort of highlights here, really that it's both environments can be critical, and that it's really about choice. And that choice is driven by, I think, all the realities that technologies enables us to, sort of benefit from in terms of where we can work and how leadership style works, right? Some people and the way that management wants to be ran really enables itself to be much more impactful in an open office, whereas some others don't. And again, there's no right or wrong answer here, but there is a thoughtful, correct answer for your company when it comes to sort of these variables that matter around people, work style, and choice. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and welcome to answer any questions with the last few minutes we have here. But a very heartfelt thank you to everyone for listening, participating with us today, and a huge thank you to the Insight team for having us on. Really appreciate it. So thanks.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Really enjoyed it. So thank you. For everyone who's attending right now, please feel free to enter your questions in the control panel. We already do have one coming in. So the first step, how do you think about prioritizing labor cost differentials versus real estate cost differentials when evaluating multiple markets?
Great. So that's a great question. We would place more weight on the geographic labor differentials than the real estate costs. And this is a good question because we find that many of our clients get hyper-focused in kind of a myopic way on real estate costs, when the main driver, the main opportunity for expansion from a cost perspective is really around the labor arbitrage opportunity. So most of the companies that we work with, the facilities, real estate and facilities budget is 2 to 4% of the overall income statement compared to well north of 10% for the payroll. So clearly there should be more weighting and prioritization around the labor cost side.
Really helpful. Thank you. And I think everyone here too would love to hear a little bit more about the services T3 can provide. Do you mind adding a little bit more color to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, the easiest way to think about what T3 can provide is if you imagine a real estate department in your company, if you imagine a senior vice president of real estate, what that person would do, any of the questions, any of the considerations, any of the tasks that you would have that person and their department work on is what T3 does. So we've tried to build an extension of the teams we work with. And many of our clients obviously have heads of real estate or senior VPs of real estate, and they augment and support the task that they're trying to accomplish and analysis they're trying to do by working and partnering with T3. So again, I talk a lot to a lot of folks around this and sort of jokingly, but we have this Avengers of real estate model, and so everyone that we've brought on has a very diverse and different background, providing hopefully some unique perspective to the same traditional real estate problems we're all trying to solve in a way that gets us to solutions faster in a more cost-effective manner and gets you focused back on your product and your people. And so whether it's brokerage work, whether it's consulting work, whether it's labor analytics, workplace experience, I mean, these are all things that we have a lot of experience and depth and have built a team and tools around and have partnered, with companies all over the globe to support one.
Great. Yeah, that's super helpful for everyone to know. And I think those were the questions that we had for now. I'll pause for 30 seconds. If anyone has a question now, please enter it in the control panel. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much both for an amazing presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be sharing the recording afterwards. So just keep a lookout for an email from Insight Partners. And T3 has been an amazing partner offering some discount to all of the portfolio companies. So feel free to check that out in the partner directory on Go Network. Thank you and hope to see you next time in the next webinar.